Your presence is important. Before I go any further, as a 90-day-old movement, we gained 62 regional seats, and we won 2 of the 10, not a one-hit wonder. We did not come. Of course, our approach has we know better. What they are calling bullying, we call from the media that directly reference the presenters are. I start from the far left. Member educator with experiences in health and management. Member of Parliament Tabitha Sarbo-Haley.
And particular industry, whether it's the sugar industry, whether it's poultry, whether it's fishing, whether it's cattle, and we can go on with the list that falls under agriculture activities. And we know definitely, right across the country, we take the counties of Berbice, Demerara, and Essequibo, the plight of the people happens to be a common one. And this takes place basically by virtue of 2 major disasters in this country, among other things. One, if we have a couple days of sunshine, then there is a depletion significantly of water. Some refer to that as a drought. And those of us who understand the science basically of plants, it requires adequate water at particular times. On the other hand, if we have a couple hours of rainfall, then we have a flood condition. And that happens throughout the country. And all of us are quite aware of that. Now, these 2 extremes are clearly a case of poor strategy, poor planning, no vision whatsoever, and a don't care approach. Because this is not happening now. This has been for decades in this country that we have these 2 extremes. And whenever it takes place, then the first thing that comes to the government's discourse or communication, oh, it's climate change. We believe it's very far away from that. We believe it's because of poor management. Very often it results in this situation. And allow me to say that we're a rare country in the sense that we're below sea level and we have high levels of rainfall. And yet in the drought period, we have inadequate volume of water. And during the floods, then while we know we are below sea levels, we haven't initiatives to ensure that we mitigate against such situations. And this has been happening for decades and decades. We know that in Georgetown, for example, when there is a bit of rainfall, there is flooding. We know that in the coastlands area, agricultural activities are terribly affected by poor farmers in particular. We know that Georgetown continues to suffer from this chronic situation, and it breeds all forms of ill health by virtue of prolonged flood and flood conditions. Homes are damaged, businesses very often loses revenue, and as I said earlier, climate change is not the only pretext or excuse, but it has to do by and large with poor management. I wish to reiterate and perhaps to repeat that when we lack the requisite planning and execution, then we find that whatever is taking place presently will continue to happen. The government has no coherent agriculture strategy. And we know that farmers throughout this country are crying ever so often. And what they are met with, it is simply promise and promises which are empty and generally has never been fulfilled. Our party, which is the Win or We Invest in Nationhood, calls for a rational and indeed a national overall overhaul of the entire drainage system in this country. And in addition to that, we are saying that there is need for a modernized agricultural policy, and real support will be given to the farmers and vice versa, so that Guyana as the breadbasket of the Caribbean and beyond.
Good morning, everyone. With all that's being said and done in education, the average man would think that all is well. However, Guyana's education system is collapsing while families struggle under unacceptable cost of living. Schools remain unsafe and poorly equipped. Bullying continues unchecked in our schools, and thousands of children, especially in rural and hinterland regions, lack reliable transportation. At the same time, many schools operate with little or no internet access, making digital learning impossible, despite national initiatives such as the Guyana Digital School. Without connectivity, these programs fail the very communities they claim to serve. Parents are fighting to keep their children in school. Transportation and school supplies become more expensive every month. In the midst of campaign-style language telling citizens that if they behave, they will get it this year, in reference to cash grants, it's deeply disrespectful. Cash grants are not favors to the Guyanese people. They are necessities in a country whose oil revenue continue to rise, whose citizens are entitled to a share of the wealth, but are only given promises. Families cannot survive on conditional promises. While dropout rates in our schools continue to increase, matriculation continues to decline, and national examination outcomes, such as the NGSA, show year performance. When calls for divisive national. This repeated promises, the government has still not delivered for families. Even though record oil earnings we only hear promises. With of the $200,000 national cash grant, repairs to school infrastructure, strict anti-bullying enforcement, reliable student transportation, and meaningful investment in digital access for all schools. To be implemented, and we have already submitted matriculation trends and NGSA outcomes, and will continue to table motions, demand answers, and challenge political theatrics. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. People, issues that affect our indigenous people. Health conditions 1, 7, 8, and 9 to travel. Conditions at the Amerindian Hostel in Georgetown are on reports of overcrowding, sharing unsafe spaces, sanitation facilities in disrepair, and a lack of basic supplies reveal a collapse of management and oversight. This is not support. This is abandonment. It reflects a government that does not prioritize the dignity, health, or well-being of our indigenous people who travel to the capital seeking medical care or government services. Region 7 faces additional challenges, including gaps in emergency response systems, shortages of trained medical personnel, and a lack of sustained investment in critical infrastructure. These hardships do not occur in isolation. They reflect years of neglect and a government that refuses to listen to the people most affected by its indifference. WIN will continue to expose these failures. We fight for a healthcare system that treats our indigenous communities that reflect equality, respect, and national.
Over the next 5 years, our opposition benches will be guided by one central mission: to ensure that the government of the day conducts the business of this nation with integrity, transparency, and respect for the rule of law. We will subject every policy, every allocation of tax dollars, and every expenditure of public funds to intense scrutiny. The people's money must be spent wisely, efficiently, and for the benefit of all Guyanese, not for a privileged few. We continue to call for the immediate convening of the constitutionally mandated meeting to elect the leader of the opposition. We have written to CARICOM, OAS, IPU, CPA, and all of the heads of missions on this issue. The continued refusal of the Speaker of the National Assembly to fulfill this obligation undermines the integrity of parliamentary democracy, obstructs critical oversight functions, and threatens the balance of power essential to good government. demands full adherence to constitutional requirements and stands prepared to pursue necessary. Region 10 is no administrative accident. It is the product of a deliberate political posture by the Minister of Local Government, Ms. Priya Manichan, and it goes to this government's refusal to respect local democracy. For Executive Officer of Region 10, who reports directly to the Minister, has been the statutory meeting to complete the election of the chairman and vice chairman. This is not a minor procedural delay. This is an obstruction of the lawful functioning of an entire regional democratic council. It is a direct interference with the constitutional right of the people of Region 10 to have their elected representatives take office and begin their work. Yet, the minister, instead of exercising her clear authority to instruct her subordinate to obey the law, has chosen to say publicly that the process is out of her hands. That statement alone reveals the depth of the hypocrisy at play. The minister has had more than enough time and more than enough power to ensure that the REO performs his duties. Her refusal to act is that the delay is politically convenient and fully aligned with the government's strategy of controlling local organs by paralyzing them. While she travels around the country staging tours and presenting herself as a champion of fairness and service, Region 10 is left without a functioning chairman and vice chairman. That is not fairness. That is not honesty. And it is certainly not a service to the people. If the minister were genuinely committed to democracy and the rule of law, the election process in Region 10 would have been completed weeks ago. Her ministry would have issued a directive to the REO the same day the meeting was illegally suspended. Instead, the ministry's silence has enabled the REO's inaction and created a constitutional vacuum in a region where the electorate has made its choice clear. The country must understand that this is what this moment represents. When a minister refuses to instruct her own subordinate to carry out a lawful statutory responsibility, it is not an administrative lapse. It is political interference by omission. It is an abuse of power through deliberate inaction, and it is an attempt to undermine the will of the people of Region 10. The minister cannot spend her days publicly performing accountability while privately refusing to uphold it. She cannot lecture municipalities about service delivery while her own ministry is actively preventing the elected leadership of an entire region from doing their jobs. The people of Region 10 deserve better. Guyana deserves better. The minister must immediately direct the REO to reconvene the statutory meeting and allow the chairman and vice chairman elected by the people's representatives to assume office without further interference. Even as the PPP continues to subvert the will of the people, Wayne has not allowed that to stop it or stop us from being the representatives that the people elected us to be. We have decided upon a parliamentary agenda of which a central pillar will be the reform of the Guyana Elections Commission and the laws that govern its operation and appointments. We can no longer afford to have an electoral body that is clouded in controversy or perceived to be partisan. The opposition will push for amendments that will guarantee that future elections are truly free, fair, and reflective of the will of the people. We have begun this by formally submitting a motion to the National Assembly for a clean and transparent voters list, calling for urgent action to strengthen the credibility of Guyana's election and rebuilding trust in the electoral system. This motion provides a practical path towards strengthening our elections and responds to long-standing concerns raised by citizens, political parties, civil society organizations, and repeated findings by international observer missions, including the European Union Election Observer Mission, about the accuracy and transparency of the current voters list. The motion calls for immediate public release of the 2022 population and housing census, biannual publication of disaggregated voter registration data, a modernization plan for the voter registration system, digital ID mechanisms, guaranteed access to voting groups, and a 90-day deadline for the government to report back to Parliament on progress. We therefore call on the government, civil society, and all parliamentary parties to support this initiative in the national interest, noting that credible elections are the foundation of a stable and democratic Guyana. Beyond broader constitutional reform, reform that modernizes our governance framework, strengthens our democracy, and limits the concentration of power. Among our key priorities will be introducing, including the Director of Public Prosecutions and the Commission of Information, establish clear limits on the period of acting appointments for the Chancellor of the Judiciary and the Chief Justice, to preserve the independence and stability of our judicial system, and a comprehensive revision of the Amerindian Act of 2006, to better reflect the rights, development needs, and aspirations of our indigenous brothers and sisters. At the heart of our is social justice. We will advocate relentlessly for higher wages and better working conditions in both the public and private sectors. Guyanese workers deserve. No government can claim success while its people struggle under the weight of rising costs and stagnant wages. We have taken the motion to increase the national minimum wage to $100,000. The purpose of this motion includes sector employees from $60,107 to $100,000 Guyana dollars, and to align minimum wage with economic realities and cost of living pressures in Guyana. Minimum wage to $100,000 per month at the earliest practicable time. Our commitment extends to social protection, and WIN believes that too many families live in poverty. Too many children go to bed. Many of our citizens with disabilities are left without proper support. Opposition will press for stronger social safety nets, accessible public services, and that ensure dignity and opportunity for the poor, the elderly, the differently abled, and the unemployed. We have in this regard, as we have tabled a motion ending the 5-year retirement pension gap and protecting Guyanese workers. Declaration that the 5-year gap, retirement and pension is unjust, harmful, and destabilizing. The motion calls for immediate commencement of the harmonization process implementation plan, and stronger NIS compliance measures, including enhanced penalties and public naming of non-compliant employers. In closing, let me say this. The days of complacency in Parliament are over. The opposition will not be a silent or silenced observer. We will be an active, disciplined, accountability, fairness, and reform. We will use the to expose corruption and to advance legislation that brings us closer to the Guyana we all deserve, one that is just, prosperous, and united.
Thank you, panelists. I will now invite the for questioning. I see Svetlana and then we have a friend from Staff News here.
MP Bohali, with respect to the meeting for the lead of the opposition, you noted that you've written a number of regional and international organizations. Could you say what the response, if you've gotten any response today? Secondly, the moving to the court with respect to both the election of the leader of the opposition of the region chairman for Ted. So you say how soon will the party move into the courts? With respect to the chairman of Region 10 again, you reference heavily to the law would have election of the regional chairman, do you see it as overreaching? You're now asking the clerk of the council to execute his mandate. Some would say that's overreaching. There's a reason why the role of the minister was removed. How now do you request her to instruct that officer to call the meeting?
Okay, let me say of the emails that were sent. The last I received that there were acknowledgements. These acknowledged receipt of the correspondence and said they will follow. The second question, forgive me, on the lawyers have started the process. I can't say it at this particular moment process, but the process has begun. And so the lawyers have taken the process. On the issue of Region 10 matter. Now, what the law did, the changes in the law, was that the minister herself cannot select who the chairman should be. But what is happening right now is an REO who has decided not to follow the law. And so if it is that he is not following the law, to convene the meeting, so that not even convene the meeting, to continue the engagement, that's the process that started, then the minister has a right to let the REO know that he needs to reconvene the meeting to have the process continue. Based on my understanding, the actual setting of the date and time of the original meeting was by the instruction of the minister. So it's not a case that the minister has no right to inform as to what processes he should and should not take. The change in the law choosing of who the chairman and vice chairman should be. So her instructing the REO to fulfill his constitutional and his legal duty, I don't see that as an overreach.
Just a clarity, could you say whether we would have received a response, please, from the Speaker of the National Assembly explaining, well, we know there hasn't been a second sitting of the National Assembly, but it was said that the meeting could take place at any time. Have you received formal response?
No, we have not received any formal response from the Speaker.
And my final question for now, it has to do with the parliamentary agenda. With the government constituting a large majority in the National Assembly, how successful do you see achieving this agenda? You spoke about reform for the Elections Commission, and over the past 5 years, or even before, we've heard the opposition talking about a clean voters list, and this requires constitutional changes. How do you intend to have what you set out achieved in
The majority? That's a very good question. Now, in the last 5 years, the conversation happening as to what is required. What the approach we have decided is issues to Parliament and have the government say that one, it's not interested in a clean voters list. Let the government tell the public that they're not interested in raising the minimum wage of the private sector to 60,000, from 60,000 to 100,000. Let the government say that 5-year gap between retirement. Okay, so we're bringing it so that they can answer to the people and publicly state their position on these matters. Before, what we had were persons at a press conference stating their issues, stating their views on the matter, but once it's debated, they will have to state their view on the matter.
Just a final, sorry, my colleague. Now, you sat in Parliament. Shut down even before they reach the floor. So there is no guarantee that your motion will.
Yes, and even that is a response by the government, because if they choose to shut it down, they're not interested in increasing the wages of the private sector. They're saying that they're not interested in fixing the 5-year gap, and it is a response, and the people response. And so whether they decide to debate the matter or they decide to figure out it off of the system, it is a response, and the people will see it as a response.
Yes, Starbuck News.
Morning. Immediately on the topic of GCOM elections and whatnot. I'm aware that GCOM has not sent out their report yet, but up to now they have spoken on the fact that they do not have any elections ready. The observer groups who have could you maybe say what led when to say more? Could you maybe say whether what has led when to that position of
Rigging is broader than whether or not something just happens at a ballot or doesn't happen. Based on what the election observer skewed a lot of things in the government's favor, and from that things were not as clean and as fair and as just as it should have been during the election process. So while we view rigging as just, our idea and concept of rigging is very minuscule or very thin, we are taking the broader approach that based on what the observer report has said, there are lots of ways in which things have gone that just benefit the government more than the other parties that were in the race for president. And so we also see that as part of what we would consider to be the rigging of the elections.
I have a friend in the back there that had his hand up.
Jarvine from NCN. First question, on the hostel issue, how does Win respond to critics who say that it engaged with the Ministry of Armenian Affairs rather than what took place that day to resolve the hostel issue? I remember members taking the banks before sometime in August a resolution to the whole issue about their proposals and so on. There hasn't been any updates.
Thank you for the question on the issue that has to do with the Armenian hostel. That why Mr. Azruddin did not engage the minister. Now you would have seen what is happening between Mr. Azruddin Mohammed and the government. And at presently, we must know that there has been no second sitting of the assembly, no meeting has been convened to have the oppositions elect the leader of the opposition. That has not been done, and hence no committees have been established. For example, the committee that should have addressed the issue as the hostel would have been the social services institutions to ensure receive the value that we expected. That is not in place at the moment, and hence there is no through the parliament have access to visit this issue. That happens in how to do it in parliament as MPs have a right to be on the ground, to visit these institutions, to speak with people and to find out what is happening. So the way that it was highlighted should not be seen in a negative light, but in a positive way.
With regards to your second question, we will be dealing with the question as it relates to our statement. That question we will answer at a subsequent deliberation.
What question he asked?
As it relates to the bank accounts.
Oh, but okay.
So, Cordell Jones from Livewire News. I have several questions on the statements made. Now, my first question is for Member of Parliament Don Hastings. You spoke about the lack of medicine at hinterland facilities and at coastal ones as well. Recently, the party that you're in made a post at the Georgetown Public Hospital. The hospital would have refuted that with photographic evidence of the medicine, and then the prescribing doctor would have given his version of that. how do you see your statement when persons look at what the hospital has put out and what you're getting from other officials? My other question is, you spoke about indigenous persons. Now, I would like to ask, as a former minister under the APNU AFC, what kind of impact was made to those far-flung communities? And do you believe, because of the location of some of these communities, it could be the reason that development may not be on pace as those closer to the coastline or those who have easier access to them, right? Going over to Ms. Tabitha Sarabo Haley, I'd like to ask you, you spoke about the election of the opposition leader. Now yourself, Ms. Dawn Hastings, and Ms. Natasha Singh Lewis, who's sitting off camera, you three are seasoned politicians. Why on the day of the swearing in of MPs did none of you rise on a standing order of any sort to engage the speaker as to why he maybe he forgot or he didn't, anything, but why you guys didn't get up as seasoned politicians to, engage the speaker on that, right? Ms. Haley, you spoke about salary increases for public servants. You were a former minister. Sorry, not public service, salary increases. Salary increases. You're a former public service minister. Why the advocacy now in opposition and not as much advocacy as a minister in government to get the minimum wage to where you're suggesting it goes to now, right? You spoke about Minister Priyamani Chan not instructing the RU of Region 10 to do his job. I'm just asking, could it be that, or do you think that the minister could be holding back so as to not have a decision made by her role, the one made by you as Minister of Public Service in firing several public servants at the Ministry of Public Service during your tenure? Mr. Hensberger, to you. Your General Secretary would have promised me on Sunday on Princess Street outside of the hostel to provide us with some information in relation to correspondence between the We Invest in Nationhood Party and the government of Guyana in relation to having access to the hostel or sharing complaints raised by persons using the facility. Up to now, we haven't gotten anything. Mr. Mohammed, your leader, would have said he would have provided it as well, and we at librarians are waiting. That's all the questions from me.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Oh,
Mr. Vishnu.
you have
Mr.
one
Vishnu.
more. Yes, sir.
Sorry, Mr. Vishnu. You spoke about drainage and irrigation. You spoke about the government not having a plan strategy. Sir, with all that you said, we heard no plan, we heard no wind strategy. Irrigation in Guyana. If at the next elections you guys are elected, change what's currently happening in the agricultural sector, and if you could tell us experience you may have in managing a large-scale agricultural project or agency that has a wide reach in terms of services to many farmers and people like that. That's it for me. Thank you.
Mr. Jones.
One point if I get blood pressure.
I don't know if you have the mask, but I said like everything else. Go ahead.
Yes.
That's fine.
That's okay.
Yes, we appreciate all of the questions.
When you first is that?
I guess I can start.
Live.
Mr. Pandy, you have the mic on, right? Now, on the issue of the speaker, because I understand Parliament and I understand what the process, I'm aware that the election of the leader of the opposition is not part of the agenda and is never part of the official agenda of the sitting of the National Assembly. And so what we did was a week before, we sent a letter to the speaker that we are prepared to elect, to have the meeting to elect leader of the opposition at the first. On the day of Parliament, we had a letter prepared with all 16 MPs signed, and once we were sworn in, we sent that letter to him again. letting him know that we are ready for the meeting. And so once there is a conclusion of the day sitting, we will expect that we will have the meeting to elect the leader of the opposition. There is no point of order to stand on in the National Assembly to deal with the matter of the election of the leader of the opposition because it's not a formal part of any procedure of the House. That is why it's not ever on the agenda. And so it's not something that can be, so I've heard a lot of persons indicate and suggest that we should have stood up and shout and make a hullabaloo, but we want to take what is the right way. And the right way would not have been to stand up because there was no point of order to stand up on that motion, on that issue. And so what we did was what is required, what we were advised to do, which is the process that we took. Why advocate now?
Salary increases.
Now, as the former Minister of Public Service, you may be aware, since you went back to that time, that what I advocated for and actually changed was the fact that the public servants had to wait 6 months, sometimes a year, for their first salary. And during that process, I could not understand why it is that was in place and had been in place for many, many years. And the decision that I took as Minister of Public Service was that they would be on a month-to-month until the system figures itself out. When I left office in 2020, it has now gone back to the person still having to wait at this juncture 6 months, 8 months, sometimes a year to get their first salary. So as Minister of Public Servants, I listened to the public servants, I heard their issues, and I advocated for that. Now, the issue of the increase in salaries during the 2015 to 2020 period, salary increases were by 77% in the public service.
During your tenure?
No, excuse me. During the 2015 to 2020 years, salaries increased by 77%. You were saying that we were not advocating for salary increases during those periods.
No, ma'am, I said the amount that you're asking for now.
I'm saying,
that is what I asked
can you please allow me to continue? I am not finished.
Go ahead.
During that period, there was no oil resource, there was no money for that, and so we did it within what we were able to do, which is far more than persons have received since then, given all of the monies that we have in our coffers. So I would hope that the government recognizes that this billion and trillion dollar budget, we never had that during my period as minister. And so we did the best with the monies that we had. And if we could have gotten 77% increase during that time period, with the $1 trillion budget that is coming and will likely to come again in 2026, I'm hoping that with that will come some serious increases for the public servants as well as a push for the private sector to come up to par with the public service. Now, the Region 10 and holding back. Now, this is also a very interesting question. I believe that the minister has the duty to ensure that certain laws are followed. If it is that you're indicating that the minister does not have the duty to ensure that her subordinate follows the law, then we have a serious problem in how it is that they function. And so if it is that you're going to argue that the minister has nothing to say when somebody that is below her is deciding not to follow the law, she should stay silent, then we know as a public that that is the kind of government we will have in the next 5 years. I will now allow the other MPs to respond to the other questions. So we will move forward.
We will have a quick follow-up. So
Mr. Jones, you'll get your follow-up just now. Let the other MPs answer the question that you asked. Then you'll get your follow-up. Let me answer your question.
I don't want to forget.
Yes.
Write it down. Mr.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jones, for the question.
Yes.
You asked if you can kindly repeat it for me. All I heard that you were asking that we had the wind had something to do with lack of medicines at the Guyana Public Hospital.
The party would have had a post on its social media page where they were saying a child couldn't get 2 forms of medication. One was for fever and one was for some sort of, I think it's fits or something of this sort. I may be wrong on the second part. Okay. However, the public hospital would have showcased that the medication is available at the hospital via photo of social media, and the doctor which prescribed would have brought some clarity to the situation surrounding the person not having the medication at the hospital and wanting to seek the medication at a private pharmacy. That is why the prescription was written. How do you view your claims about medication not being available at public institutions when the party that you represent would have put out this information, which later on was based on information proven to be untrue?
Okay, my answer to that question, if you had listened to my statement, I did mention essential services remain centralized in Georgetown. I did say that. And that's about the health system, the health care, medication. I'm going to share an experience during the campaign where I went to Kaikan Health Center. That's way at the border. I cut my finger and I headed to the health center. And believe me, there was not even a bandage at that hospital or a plaster at the health center. Personally, I experienced that. I asked the health worker if she had a saline water that she could at least disinfect, clean it, and put some iodine on it. So these are realities. When we were in government, because you were asking what was the difference and what impact we had.
Right.
Where I come from, the village of Kako, we built a doctor's quarter. And we had a resident doctor in that village. And things were beginning to look brighter. For the past, when we came up, unto this date, that building has not been occupied. And several other communities, like in Bamada and other communities, we built these doctors' quarters. But of course, it was not of the best, but it was there with basic amenities. They had solar power, they had refrigerator, they had beds, they had stoves. And so the doctors were able to manage for at least a year. And the drugs were in constant supply to these communities. So that's a good story that I can tell about what is happening then and now.
And I asked about the location of the communities. That may be some of the reasons why the development that you spoke of not reaching them, that might be why it's not as fast as other areas. Do you believe so?
Well, I will say that for example, where I am from, the only means of getting is by the aircraft.
Okay.
When you're in government, you have medivacs. You have access to these, air services that you can call on them at any time. You have Dr. Govaya, yes, who owns the Roraima Air Services, and so they still have access to that.
Are you saying those services are not available anymore?
Mr. Jones, you raised something very important. Your first question was drainage and irrigation.
Correct.
Your second question, it was not too clear, but I'll ask you to clarify, but it has to do something with managing large-scale projects in agriculture.
Your experience in managing large-scale projects, probably an agency like the Ministry of Agriculture, anything of the sort.
Sure.
Go ahead.
So let me take you on drainage and irrigation.
Sure.
Now, why we are in this state, and this is reference to my opening remarks, why we are in this state, it is that we first, and then irrigation I'll address subsequently. Now, with drainage, we have to look as to what systems we have, how well they are serving us now, how efficient they are, as against what it used to be historically.
Right.
And let me give now, we had a railway station from Georgetown. So the train used to be traveling along the East Coast, right up to that was then, maybe a lot of decades ago. If you any longer, train service any longer. But along the train line where it used to be, we call it road or something of the sort. So what has happened? A road has taken over all those straight down to the Atlantic. So we have businesses, we have houses, we have housing rather, we have roads, but we have not made the requisite adjustment to the drainage capacity. So what used to be then very efficient is no longer efficient now. And the government, if you take the present government for nearly 30 years, 3 decades, there has never been a single policy to address the drainage situation, what it used to be then, as against what it is now, and the deficiencies we have. And I want to conclude that by saying, we have 2 drainage methods in this country. One is called sluices, or commonly referred to as cokers, and the other is called pumping. Now, when we look at our rainfall, which ranges among the highest in the world, we only have perhaps like Peru and Indonesia, which is close to our rainfall regime in Guyana. We have up to between 2,500 millimeters. Our LTM ranges somewhere around 19 to 2,100. And we're below sea level. This is a double whammy, high rainfall and below sea level. But yet we have a large number of sluices or cokers that we depend on to drain and drain efficiently. Now, sluices are tidal. When the tide is washing or the water is rising, you have to close the sluice. When it's falling, then you open the sluice. So we can only drain our land by cokers or sluices with a tidal arrangement. What we need to do at this stage with all the developments that are taking place, or so-called developments, we need to ensure that we have an assessment done of our current structures, such as the age of the structures, where they are located at this moment, what developments are taking place in those communities, and what do we do, what change do we need to make to continue to have efficiencies. Now, these cokers requires to be replaced by pumps. And the pumps with the TPM, or the tons per minute discharge, will be determined by the area that we are talking about. So, to address your drainage, I think I've said to you what it used to be, what we need to do by looking at data, make an evaluation or an assessment, and then we go forward by replacing sluices with pumps. That's a dire need. And we haven't heard about anything big in terms of that strategy from the government or that policy. What we know is significant and exorbitant expenditure by the NDIA, National Drainage Irrigation. Now, when we look at irrigation, I said drainage, I'm finished with. Irrigation has to do definitely with making available water to farmers and their crops. And there is a difference between readily available water versus total available water. So in other words, if you have a reservoir or the Lamaha that is 12 feet deep at high tide or high levels, and it's depleted, you will still have about 4 or 5 feet water inside. So you only have about 8 feet for usage. So we have to increase the storage volume or capacity because there is increase in farming activities. So we have to do that, one. Two, we have to ensure that our water management is efficient. And we're not having that. We have, take the Maheka Creek, for example. That creek is 24/7 blowing out to the ocean. If we had a sluice somewhere built in the creek, then during the dry weather we can build to manage our water and manage the resources better. So the irrigation has to do with creating structures such as reservoir, increased capacity for water storage, and to manage the affairs or the resources better. That's why drainage and irrigation. Regards the managing of agricultural project, yes, I was the agriculture director of Gaisuku, and that was late December of 2024 up to then. And that's a very large, if not the largest agriculture entity. It is not successful. It's a large entity, and I've given you some examples of the drainage and irrigation.
of the opposition leader. Could you say in the event that your party leader is extradited, if there's clarity as who could be a possible candidate? Also on social media, the party's general secretary is being a candidate. Could you comment on that?
Can you please repeat?
Social media that she could be a potential candidate. Could you comment on that?
Our leader, while it's in the courts, we're waiting to. But yes, we have one leader, and he remains the leader until such time that that changes. And so that is where that stands. So you asked something else. Was that it?
I want to go back to the hostel, please. Just MP was allotted to Minister Sugai in 2024 of the hostel, specifically as it relates to the washrooms, the places where persons were sleeping, etc. Could you say whether there were any as we are in 2025 and we're seeing that not much work has been done?
Well, now that it's being highlighted, we know that it existed, and we as the representatives of the people will have to ask questions in the National Assembly pertaining to what has happened and where the monies went. That's one of our responsibilities. We can ask the questions orally or written, and that we intend to do.
Referring from NCA.
Yes, taking back to healthcare, 6 regional hospitals were opened this year, and there are plans to open more in places like Morupa, Cato, Lethem, and so on. You talked about the emphasis on centralized healthcare and so on. Would you say that this is part of a long-term fix to decentralized healthcare delivery?
I think perhaps we have to consider that building hospitals is possibly a start. However, what is the use of the hospitals without the necessities and resources? Because we do have a shortage of doctors, which forces the doctors that we have in the system it is nice that the government wants to portray and wants to go back to the drawing board. And as we decided we're planning these hospitals, visit personnel in order to support everything that is happen and make a functional hospital.
About the correspondence from the General Secretary. Mr. Vishnu, I'd just like to ask, are you aware of any plan of a Hope-like canal or anything like a pump station being commissioned anywhere in relation to what you just said about pumping for dry periods? And my last follow-up is for Mr. Tabitha Sarago-Bailey. You spoke about not having oil money, that you were a part of giving a 50% salary increase to ministers upon entering government without oil money. That's it for me for today.
Mr. Get in contact with our GS to ask her to follow up on that promise that was made. I will ask my colleague to answer that question that you've asked or follow up on with regards to. Sure.
So, APNU has a press conference weekly. And so any issues that you have with APNU, endured you for quite some time with your questions that you to ask those persons that sent you with those questions, to ask them about their corruption and those things that are happening in the Ministry of Agriculture and those other issues that you intend to raise. The reality is that WIN is setting a new agenda. We have set our agenda. We are moving forward. We have issues that we have raised. I can say that our leader is accessible to the people. Our regional and members of parliament are accessible to the people. We choose to believe the people when they say to us that they have issues in our hospitals, that they have issues in our schools, that we have issues in a lot of the public services that they have to go to get service. And so when those issues come to us, it is our responsibility to share those issues so that they can be adequately and effectively resolved by the government, who seems to be unaware of all the issues that exist in the country. And so I think WIN is taking an approach that the people respond to. And I want to publicly say right now that the leader that we have has ensured that all of us stay in touch with the people, hear from the people, and we're not speaking in a bubble. And so the representation that we bring here and the representation that you will continue to see from us would be hearing from the people and bringing their concerns to the fore. I don't know if anyone else wants to speak on.
We have a question here by Miss Marshall, and this will be our last question for this morning.
Yes, because of the hour.
Ms. Holly, since you mentioned the leader, this is the first press conference since last election. You say why the leader is not here at this press conference. And to Mr. MP Andre Lewis, you spoke about connectivity. Could you maybe tell us some of the communities that you visited or that you know of that lack connectivity, particularly in the hinterland? And you spoke about food supplies. You spoke about food transportation being expensive. And what measures do you recommend government put in place to alleviate some of the burdens people are facing right now? And is it that you were calling for a $200,000 cash grant, or you're saying that the government promised 200? I'm a bit confused. I didn't hear you clearly. That's all.
All right. The media would know that the leader of the party is very accessible. He does not shy away from responding to questions from the media. He's been very vocal. Every time he has to go to court, you see him, you ask him questions. And so he thought that today other MPs would have the ability to come to the fore and to share their views. And so you get to see more of the members of parliament, because you see a lot of him, you hear a lot of him, a lot from him. And so we have some other MPs here that can also engage with the press. So that's why he isn't here today, but you know that he is accessible.
Okay, so I'll respond to the first question. I believe it was about connectivity. And we don't even have to go far to the interland communities that I wish to name, but we could start right here, or we could start in Region 3, where I'm from, where if you walk into the West Demerara Secondary School, for instance, there is access sometimes, maybe once a week or so, in the principal's office, but nowhere else in the school. Now, with initiatives such as the Guyana Online School, if you are saying as a government that the students should have access because this is a good direction, we're integrating technology, which is great, then the least we can do is, even in the coastline, have internet accessibility for all our students. So that's one. The other thing is, if you can consider what is happening now on the coastline, and we're taking schools in Region 3 that I can personally speak of into account, imagine what is happening in the interland communities with connectivity. The reality is, if I go to the market right now, the food prices more. And that is the reality on the ground. And hinterland. We need to come, not the interland, but we have to compare it to the hinterland and into the hinterland. And imagine the price increase when transportation, and I'll go ahead by stating communities because it helps to value. The MP Tabitha has said it's come because we're able to speak personally about the experiences. If I, and you've seen this in our page, we've highlighted it throughout, dire. There were free school buses before that was removed. It was replaced by transportation where you cannot even afford to feed your family. They're telling you that you need, here, this is a school bus, but you have to pay. Then your place is gone. And it's not gone for that one time because somebody else is. This time you're unreliable, so somebody else gets to take over. And that's what I have seen. Not only that, is the public transportation for these students get. Because what it has come to is you stand on the road for a very long time waiting for a bus because you're on the East Bank. And then you stand there for hours. School is going on because after 9 o'clock, the students are still standing on the road waiting for transportation. And then the issue that they're waiting for transportation, but while they wait for the transportation. So those are concerns. The cash grant situation, I believe you asked for a recommendation before getting to that though. So the recommendation would be for the government to consider that funding and government projects should transcend. One administration puts something in place such as free transportation, that government spending, that was put in place because we used money, and it shouldn't be done away with because it wasn't part of your administration. And what the government needs to consider is they need to put systems in place to school. It should not be that we think of great initiatives that would look great, but we have to think of initiatives that actually cater to the people and that will work. And if you see people, if you go around and you actually know your Guyanese people and you know the plights of the Guyanese people, you will then know transportation, and we need to figure that out to make sure they get to school. Interesting group of people who have this struggle with transportation and everything else, while others are looked at, and we think that by on the cash grant situation, for the Guyanese people to receive
Your gratitude remains unshakable. With honesty, courage, and unwavering determination. It is about the future of this country and those who have been on our commitment to accountability, transparency, and the service of the people. Thank you. We look forward for ongoing engagement as we continue this journey together for the people.
Thank you.
Thank you.